This is a Step Beyond the Fire podcast. My name is Cully. I'm a land manager and a wildlife biologist here in my home state of Florida. I invite you to join me on a journey as I seek to document the little-known stories told by those who use fire for the benefit of the land, also known as prescribed fire. So come on, let's head into the field and meet the people where the flame ends and new life begins. Support for A Step Beyond the Fire podcast is due in part to the following sponsor.
Hello, this is Scott Crosby, owner of Crosby Forestry and GIS Services, LLC. My mission is to help private landowners with their forest management needs. I specialize in timber sales, reforestation, forest management plans, and exotic plant mapping. Check out my website at crosbyforestry.com to find out how my 33 years of forestry experience in Florida can help serve you and your land management needs. I will look forward to speaking with you about how to turn your land into forest and forest into cash with a stewardship ethic.
Welcome back to another episode of A Step Beyond the Fire podcast. I have with me here today a local legend named Steve Miller. Steve Miller currently serves as the Regional Director of Fire and Aviation Management for the U.S. Forest Service out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Steve became a legend here in Florida for the tremendous influence he had as a bureau chief with the St. Johns River Water Management District. During his time with the district, he oversaw the land management program for 420,000 acres of district-managed lands and 200,000 acres of cooperatively managed lands. His responsibilities during that time included forest management, recreation oversight, hunting programs, grazing management, and ecological restoration projects. And he also served as the senior leadership for the fire and emergency management functions of the district. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thanks, Cully. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and you're tuning in today from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which I think is awesome. I'm using this program now, which a lot of the earlier episodes were actually out in the field, and I really am enjoying this because I'm getting to connect with folks that are a little bit further than driving distance way to do this. So I appreciate your time, though.
Glad to be here.
So the first question I wanted to get into, you've gained an incredible amount of respect for the work that you've done here during your time in the state of Florida. So not many people know the story of how you began building a successful prescribed burn program from scratch with a horse named Jeff. Can you talk a little bit more about what that was like?
I had a moment that was just serendipity, right? That's when everything good lines up to make something really happen. I joined the Water Management District in February of 1992, and there was a lot of emphasis on land acquisition. The CARL program had been Conservation and Recreational Lands program had been going since 1979. In 1989, we started the Preservation 2000 acquisition program, and the Water Management District was working actively with all of the partners, whether they be local government or any of the state agencies or the federal agencies, including the Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Forest Service. And so they had most of the land that up to that point had been flood control project down in the upper basin of the St. Johns. But now they were starting to acquire uplands, and they recognized those uplands needed management. And so I was there when they decided to put an emphasis on management, and I was what they called the land management coordinator, and there were 5 of us. And the Water Management District had bought a piece of property from Union Camp Paper Company at the time. And when we did that, one of the staff from Union Camp also came to work with to the Water Management District to manage the lands he'd been managing since he was 18 years old when he started working for Union Camp. And he had horses, and he had really good horses that were trained to do what the rider wanted. So here we were at the opportunity of building a land management program with some people who had a really neat skill set and the access to horses. And when they first told me we should go burning off of horses, I was skeptical because the horses I grew up with were a different being. They didn't necessarily want to do what you wanted them to do. But we went out and we were partnering with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We had land, the Water Management District had land that was immediately adjacent to the St. John's Wildlife Refuge. So we had pooled all of our resources to burn. And my first day on Jeff burning, we were using a helicopter for early ignition, but we had to light the edge from the ground with the horses. And so there was a fire, Fish and Wildlife fire truck behind us who was revving his engine because he was overheating. So we wanted the fan to speed up, and there was the helicopter in the air, and the fire was burning into the Spartina grass and wax myrtle. And it was had some pretty strong fire behavior. And a covey of quail went out from underneath Jeff's right foot. And Jeff just kept doing his job. And Danny, the cowboy who owned the horse, looks over at me and he says, "Man, if he didn't throw you then, he's never going to throw you." And he never did.
That's incredible.
We burned together for 17 years before he retired. And then I'd check on him every once in a while, and he passed away at the ripe old age of 34 in 2017.
Wow, that's incredible.
But it was a heck of an opportunity. And because we had the partnerships on the acquisition side, we had partnerships on the land management side. And everybody sort of took the approach of, hey, I got a wrench, you got a hammer. How about I get to use your hammer when I need it, and you get to use my wrench when you need it. And we all were, at the time, kind of growing together because the land acquisition programs were taking off, and emphasis on prescribed fire was increasing dramatically as far as prescribed fire as a good, sound ecosystem management tool. And so it was a perfect opportunity for people to partner, to see what we could do to get the benefit from the synergy of working together and sharing wisdom and lessons. And so as we were building the program, we got a chance to see how everybody did their version of land management. And we could take the really good ideas that each agency had and incorporate them into our land program. And if they had some not so good ideas, we'd leave them on the table and not move them into our program. So it was a heck of an opportunity.
Yeah, that's incredible because, we talk a lot on this show about how important it is to leverage partnerships and work together with people. And it's never, a one-person show when you're doing this kind of work. And this brings me back to, you had reminded me about this great presentation that you did that took place at the Association for Fire Ecology Conference back in 2017. And I just happened to be out there in the audience, amongst all, 700 other people. And I thought of you for this show because I have never forgotten the presentation that you had given that talked about, the story of Jeff and how Jeff kind of got you, gave you that leverage that you needed, and you and him had this great, thing going on where you guys can start this great type of work. But also there were some other things in that presentation about leadership and about empowerment of people that always stuck with me. And you can ask some people that know me well enough. I've mentioned this presentation to them a few times over the years, and it's probably because you had a football analogy in this presentation. But I'll let you talk a little bit about that. But, one of your leadership philosophies is centered on empowerment. So how would you say that that's impacted the success of the programs that you've been involved with over the years?
So as the land base grew and the land management program at St. John's grew, we would obviously add some people. When I got there were 5 of us, and when I retired, there were 35 of us. And so we would shift boundaries around, but essentially in each sort of subset, there was a land manager, and typically a land management specialist and a land management technician. And they were responsible for the 50 to 70,000 acres in most of the regions. The southern region's a little bigger because it's got the whole flood control project. And essentially, we empowered them and we delegated the authority so that they were like a parent with this child that they were going to raise. And I'm convinced, because they were empowered, they had that sense of ownership. So if we had a wildfire on Father's Day, and we did have a wildfire on Father's Day, I could call people, and they were going to come and help because it was the land that needed them, so to speak. And they had that strong commitment towards making the land better. And the football analogy was that the job of the leaders, and my boss, Eric Marzoff, gave me this one. Our job was to be linebackers to their running backs so that they could score points. We were going to deal with the bureaucratic issues, the meetings, the agreements, and whatever that would empower them to spend more time on the land, serving their stewardship responsibility to the land. And at one point in time, we had a whole lot of change going on, and I wanted to make sure that they sort of had focus. And so I went around and I asked each of them, said, what does the world look like when you do your job well? And so one of them was Sean Moore, an invasive plant technician, and he said, the world looks like the bad stuff is brown and the good stuff is green. Right. You keep that focus. That's your end zone. You go there. Chris Oman, GIS person who did way more than just GIS. What's the world look like when you're doing your job well? He says the field managers have the software and the mapping tools they need such that they can spend as little time as necessary to develop plans and do reporting so they could maximize their time in the field. Right on. You got it. Jeremy Olson, land manager at the time, I said, what does the world look like? And he says, our lands start to look like the pictures in the picture books from the 1900s kind of thing, where there's a healthy ground cover layer with the right overstory. And so that sounds like a simple way to describe what we needed them to do, but it was understandable. It gave them vision, and then we empowered them to go do that. And they knew when they needed to either ask for guidance or let us know what was going on kind of thing. So it was also dependent on really effective communication. And I got to tell you, when I worked there, I realized one day on my way into work, because of the team I was blessed to work with, I had reached that tip of the triangle in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I had gotten to self-actualization, not so much from my actions, but because the team was so successful and we sort of functioned like one organism. We understood how each other worked. It was a special moment.
That's fantastic. There's, like you said, that empowerment portion of this whole discussion is such, like, it's a simple concept, but it can be leveraged and magnified, and it can create echoes that last generations too, I think, which is really cool about that. So yeah.
So you said that, and it's kind of interesting for me. 3 weeks ago, we had a big prescribed fire workshop up here. It was a Northeast Midwest prescribed fire workshop. And I was asked to make a couple of presentations. One of them was, what is my leader's intent? And it was, I communicated that this was about building a legacy of prescribed fire. It's not about one and done. You need to establish a system that can sustain itself over the long haul. And at the time, the dress code was business casual, but I was wearing a T-shirt underneath my sport coat because when I was at the Water Management District, the record year for prescribed fire acres completed was 52,000 in 2008. And in 2021, they broke that record and got close to 53,000.
I saw somebody wearing one of those T-shirts.
And they sent me the T-shirt. And I used that to prove, okay, legacy. The program continues despite my departure. And yet they still recognized the contribution and wanted to make sure I could share in their success. So they sent me the T-shirt. So during trying to talk about building a legacy, I unbuttoned my sport coat and showed the T-shirt, and as proof that a legacy exists and continues and survives.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I bet everybody loved that. That's a really great illustration in terms that anybody can really understand, because like you said, those I was on a burn over at Longleaf Flatwoods, and I think one of the invasive plant techs had that shirt on. I was like, wait, hold on a second, let me see this. Y'all burn this many acres? My mind was blown, and I was excited that same year because the city program here, we had 9 good burn days, which is a big deal. We burned 120 acres. And when you look at it by the numbers, I mean, it was a record year for us, but for different reasons, But I look at that 52,000 number, I'm like, wow, man, that's impressive.
So every burn is important. It makes a difference ecologically. And so, at the prescribed fire workshop in Madison 3 weeks ago, there were folks from Cook County, which Cook County is the county in Illinois that includes Chicago. And they have 80,000 acres of parklands in there, and they burn about 12,000 acres a year there in Chicago.
And really?
So you think about the commitment, and part of this is telling the story so that people understand it and can believe in it. And they've done such a good job at telling the story. The people in Cook County voted a 3-cent tax increase, with funds going to the Cook County preserves. So they had communicated it. They built the social license. They had the support necessary to do that. So there's all kinds of cool stories around. So it's not about 53,000 acres. It's, are you getting as much as you can get in your area?
I'm writing this down because I'd love to talk to some of those folks at Cook County. That's an incredible number, especially in the city of Chicago. Holy cow. I can't even imagine. That blows my mind.
Because they had developed a relationship with the fire crew at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. So the woman who was giving the presentation was talking about these partnerships, and these opportunities to mentor and nurture the next generation are really important. She says, but if you're going to go out and grab a university, you can't have Stevens Point at spring break because we already have them. So they have bonded there to the point where they're possessive.
Oh man, that's hilarious. Well, I think this is a good time to hear more about, and I have this capitalized in my notes just so you're aware, Steve's parade theory of life. I enjoyed hearing about that, and I think our listeners would enjoy hearing more about that too.
Okay, so Steve's parade theory of life. When we're born, we join a parade. We join near the back of the parade. And the people who are providing us a safe learning environment and are sharing their experience and their life lessons or whatever are grandparents and parents and aunts and uncles and older siblings. And all of those folks who have gone before you lead the parade, and you follow along and learn from them and their experience. Then when you join your career, you do the same thing, and you've got your supervisors and your mentors at the front of the parade, and you join near the back of the parade. And over time, you assimilate information from the people in front. You learn more, you become more capable. And as life goes on, you get busy learning all that stuff. And then you start to notice that the front of the parade's a little shorter. Some of the people and you're closer to the front. And some of the people have retired or passed away or gone on to other things, and you find yourself kind of close to the front of the parade. I was lamenting how much I had benefited from people who had provided leadership to me, to my cousin. And I said, I'm missing all of them. She said, well, the energy you're spending missing, you should just refocus and focus on helping develop the people who are following you in your parade so that they can take what you've done or take what others have done and go farther, faster, stronger kind of thing. And I really liked her interpretation of it. I understood the people who I had benefited from learning, but now, I'm 60, almost 61 years old, so I'm spending more of my time focused on the people following in the parade than the people in front of me. And this was really reinforced. The benefit of this was reinforced. I went out as a deputy incident commander on an incident management team to a fire outside a little town of Paisley, Oregon. And as I'm coming into town, a student from Stevens Point, University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, who I had taught some NWCG fire classes to, called and he said, "Hey, I hear you're bringing an IMT." I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, I've been running an engine on night shift." And I said, "What kind of engine?" He said, "Type 6. I said, "You're at the gas station. I could see you." So we went over and we chatted about what was going on. And Kurt was just coming off a night shift as we were coming in. So in Oregon, they have a thing called the Conflagration Act. When fires are bad enough, the governor pulls the switch on the Conflagration Act, and all of a sudden, all the fire departments, whether they have a whole lot of wildland fire experience or not, start to contribute, start to help out with the fires. And that night, I watched a strike team from municipal fire departments who didn't have a whole lot of wildland fire experience learn from Kurt, who I had taught. Kurt was teaching them how to do a firing operation that was then going to protect the town of Paisley. We had established a dozer line and it needed to be fired off. And so that was sort of that full picture of the results of the parade theory of life, all in one little sort of snapshot. And it was moving and reassuring.
Yeah, if that's not full circle, I don't know what it is. That's I see a Florida Gators cup there. Is that
Yeah, I did my master's there at the University of Florida.
Oh, I didn't know that. Far out.
My master's in ecological restoration.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's a great program there. Well, yeah, definitely a really great story to remind folks that it's you can't underestimate the power of giving back to other people in all different types of situations, whatever it may be, in any way, shape, or form. And it's
another fun fact about teaching folks at the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point Fire Crew. They have heard the things that are on my bucket list. And when they achieve my bucket list, like fighting a fire from a canoe in the Boundary Waters canoe area, they'll send me pictures of them doing it before I've actually got to check it off on my list. So it is a friendly relationship with just a little bit of competition.
That's awesome. I had a boy, yeah, from a canoe. That's a new one. But I had a friend recently who went. I forget what state he was in, but he was on a rafting trip, and they came around, into this canyon, and there was a wildfire going on, and they had ash floating down and putting holes in the raft. Like it was not a good situation. So, yeah, scary stuff.
So what they do in the Boundary Waters is when they find a fire, they'll fly in 2 people and a canoe on the side of the canoe's on the side of de Havilland Beaver aircraft. And then they'll load the canoe up and they'll paddle off to wherever the fire's edge is and look for the portage trails and then reinforce the portage trails and stop it. So they're not actually fighting fire from the canoe, but they're using the canoe to transport themselves to where they need to be.
Man, yeah. Those portage trails, that's critical, man. They probably got some portages that are over a mile or 2, right?
Yeah. Anyway, that's still on my bucket list. We'll see if I get it checked off.
Well, speaking of those kinds of things, what has been on your mind recently that you would like to share with folks?
So if we look back, the original folks who were doing prescribed fire, they don't call it that. They call it either indigenous use of fire or cultural use of fire. We're doing it for 10,000 years. And then their ability to use fire got interrupted. And an awful lot of, very few people know the scale at which the indigenous population was managing ecosystems with their primary tool being fire. And that's really starting to get energy of how do we do a better job of getting that kind of fire on the landscape at a broader scale. So lots of conversations on it. And there's this is a perfect story. A guy named Henry Lewis, he was an anthropologist, came and spoke at a fire conference. He was the dinner speaker at a fire conference in Orlando in 2003. And I'm thinking, you got an international fire conference and we have an anthropologist as the dinner speaker? But, yep. And he goes in and he was working with tribes in Alberta, First Nations in Alberta. And the tribal leaders wouldn't talk to him about how they use fire. He thought it was a trust issue. He would ask the tribal leadership, how do you use fire? And they'd say they don't use fire. And so he got frustrated after a while, and he sits down on a log, and the oldest woman in the tribe comes by, and she says, what's the matter with you? And he says, well, I'm trying to learn how your tribe uses fire, and the elders say they don't use fire. And so she sits down and says, okay, so in the spring, this side of the meadow is going to get more sunlight and the snow is going to melt there. So we're going to go in and we're going to burn it. And then these berries are going to come about 6 weeks later. And so by burning it, then this is what will happen. And then you come back about 5 days later, the rest of the meadow is thawed, but there's still snow in the woods, and you got the area that you already burned. And so you can burn that, and then you're going to get this plant to sprout so we can get stems so that we can weave baskets. And she walked across the landscape, all based on fuel moisture and phenology of the plants that would control the fire. So she's not building any fire lines. She's in harmony with the environment and knows exactly what's going to happen as she moves it across the landscape. So he listens to her for about 2 hours. He goes back to the tribal elders and he's like, why didn't you trust me? I'm like, we trust you. Why do you think we don't? He said, well, I asked you if you use fire and you say you don't. And they said, that's because we don't. He said, well, I talked to Mrs. Grey Wolf for the last 2 hours. And he goes, and the tribal elder goes, oh, yes, men don't use fire. Women use fire. And so here, that story captures it all. They know how to do it in harmony with the environment. They understand the ecological effects of it. But if we're going to try and learn, we've got to ask the right questions of the right people, or we aren't going to benefit from that kind of harmony. That's amazing. Somebody wants to understand the full scale of indigenous fire use, the book they need to read is The Forgotten Fires, and Henry Lewis does the forward in it. It's overwhelming.
The Forgotten Fires is the name of the book?
Yep. And it's cool because what they're doing is they're going in to get the notes from people like Bartram or Spanish missionaries in the Southwest, and they go around the country. They go around North America, looking at the earliest historical records to try and learn what the effects of indigenous fire were in each of those plant community kinds of things. Anyway, so that's, I think about, I am an incident commander from a wildfire suppression standpoint. I much prefer prescribed burning, but I understand, sort of both roles. And to the degree that we could improve our harmony with the landscape and fire on that landscape, like that woman described to Henry Lewis, I think that would be good for everybody and their ecosystems.
Yeah, that's incredible. Really unique perspective. We've talked in the last couple, 2 or 3 episodes about indigenous burnings in other areas of the world. And last episode we had Rick Anderson on. I don't know if you knew Rick, but he talked a lot about even growing up having fire and his understanding of fire being passed down to him from his ancestors. There's a lot of value there, and it does sound like, maybe we haven't been asking the right questions when we're learning these things, and we're trying to, get that kind of information from folks who've been doing this for so much longer than we have, and they have all this ancestral knowledge.
Well, and one of the real challenges, it's most indigenous cultures have verbal histories, meaning it's a story grandpa tells grandchild or grandma tells grandchild, and that's the way it relays. I met a woman, Sahoy Thrower. She's an environmental permitter with the Creek tribe in Alabama. And so her day job is not fire. She's learning about fire because her grandmother is a medicine woman and can identify over 400 species of plants, but they can only find about 180 of them because the rest of them are fire dependent. And so Sahoy's in a race against time to learn enough about fire to get enough fire on the landscape that she can learn from her grandmother the remaining 220 species of medicinal plants before her grandmother is no longer able to share the story.
Incredible. That's a really, it sounds like a really interesting story that yeah, we can all learn a lot from. I'll definitely check that book out, The Forgotten Fires. Don't forget about that one. I'll definitely have to look through
Omar
that.
Stewart is the author.
Omar Stewart?
Yep.
Got it. Cool. Shifting gears a little bit here, I came across this question and I thought it would be a fun one to ask to kind of get a little bit of, a little bit of perspective on things. When have you, amongst all of the experiences in your time using fire, when have you grown the most in your life, and what caused that growth?
So when I first moved to Florida, I came from the Texas Forest. I worked for the Texas Forest Service for 2 years, and then I joined what was then the Florida Division of Forestry. Now it's Florida Forest Service. And I was working down in Sarasota, Florida. And my boss, Doug Voltolina Sr., he and I hit it off, and he had a lot of confidence in what I could do. And he was an incident commander for the Florida State Red Incident Management Team. And he would, whenever he got an assignment, he would call me. And it was always a good news, bad news story. The good news is he was going to give you a really great assignment because he had identified a role for you on this incident management team. And the bad news is it was always going to be a couple, 15% beyond your comfort zone, because what he could see in you was going to stretch you beyond what you were comfortable doing. And I knew it was a gift at the time, but I didn't understand the full gift until I could sort of see it in my rearview mirror. He was causing me to grow. And then I grew a little bit, and then he would give me a new assignment, and I'd have to grow a little bit more. And what I realized is that willingness to step into a situation that's beyond your comfort zone really pushes you to your fuller potential. If I go out jogging, I'm going to jog at my comfortable speed. If I want to force myself to jog faster, I'm going to go on a treadmill and speed it up. So I got to go the speed of the treadmill, kind of thing, to force me to go a little bit faster than I would normally be comfortable. And so when we're going through our careers, there are a lot of places we could be comfortable, or we can stretch just a little bit into the uncomfortable zone and make us more capable and help bring along some other folks at the same time. And I realize how much of a gift he gave me by teaching me that early.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It feels like when we're going through a really uncomfortable period in time, I can identify with what you said about this too, because I went through a period of growth when I first became like a supervisor and had a team of people to worry about. And it was uncomfortable. I was stressed, and I went from managing a $3,500 a year budget to, over probably about 400,000 a year or so. Then it became, a lot of extra stressors. But I can definitely identify with that. That's a great Great way
My
of thinking
dad
about
used
that.
to have this thing that he'd say: two people can go to work someplace for 5 years. One person gets 1 year of experience 5 times, and the other one gets 5 years of experience. And the difference being of what are they willing to take on. And when
Yeah.
in 2018, I needed to either go into the drop program in Florida or I needed to find my next challenge. And when I was sitting down thinking about it, I thought I'd done most of what I could do at the Water Management District, and staying for the 5 more years of drop might get me into the category of 1 more year of experience 5 times, rather than coming up here to be the regional fire director, leaving the people I knew, the network that we had shared, and a firm understanding on the part of the public and everyone else about the ecological importance of prescribed fire, and coming up to a region that was trying to build a regional prescribed fire program. There were expectations that we would increase what was getting done on the landscape, and I saw that as an opportunity. But it was also sort of like time traveling. After the 98 fires, we put a lot of energy into building social license around prescribed fire and explaining the whys and the wherefores and the ecological benefits and that kind of stuff in Florida, to the point where there's a very common understanding of why it's important and why it's good. Coming up here, there's probably about 20% of the population that has that same understanding. And so this is a lot more like work than I was expecting, because we have to tell the story. We have to do the convincing. We got to show the results of what we can do. And so it's that's way I didn't realize it at the time, but this is stretching me every bit as much as one of Doug Voltolina's phone calls did.
That's fantastic. Well, I appreciate you sharing with us your story of how that unfolded. That's a very valuable thing to hear about, and it gives me a lot to think about too in my own trajectory. And I'm sure a lot of folks that are hearing this too will be thinking about that. Well, you've given us an incredible amount to think about over this in this discussion, and I wanted to kind of close things up with, if you had the attention of the whole world for about 5 minutes or so, is there a message that you'd like to give?
So
he's pulling out his wallet.
one of the things I benefited from was knowing a guy named Lane Green. Lane was the executive director of Tall Timbers for a long time, and he sort of looked like Buddy Ebsen, and he had this great Southern twang. And Lane would say about prescribed fire, he'd sort of close every sentence or every paragraph with this: prescribed fire, a safe way to apply a natural process, ensure ecosystem health, and reduce wildfire risk. And it's as important as rain and sunshine. And so he's right. It is, and prescribed fire is really important to good ecosystem management. And Lane spent a career convincing folks, and I think there's still some convincing to do. And so those of us who believe in that have to be what I call prescribed fire evangelists, meaning we got to carry the message.
I totally agree. I guess that's a little bit about one of the big reasons why I'm doing this right here, meeting up with folks like you, so we can continue to spread the message any way we can, right?
And I appreciate the opportunity, Cully. I really do.
Yeah, thank you very much again, and we appreciate you taking us in another step beyond the fire.